Everyone hear me, or do I need the mic? Yes. Microphones, I think it just kind of sound a little awkward. So I figured, you know what? I'm just going to project my nice big fat Greek voice. Hello and welcome to our presentation featuring Austin Knight, who will be giving you a great view of what user experience is like. This event is hosted by the School of Information Science through our Information Communication Technology program. My name is Tamika Tompoulides, and I am the Student Affairs Officer for the School of Information Science, and I work as a recruiter for the Master's Program in Information Communication Technology. Thank you all so much for coming here. It looks like we have a great audience. I hope everyone was able to sign in at the front. If you did not, please make sure that you do so before you leave, as well as submit your feedback form so that way we can have an understanding of what you thought of the presentation. If you're also here for any extra credit for classes, please make sure that you let us know, as well as sign in and the sign-in sheet indicating for which class you are trying to get that extra credit. We don't want to miss out on that. Before we get started, I do want to introduce you all a little bit of what information communication technology is for those of you that don't really know what the program or what it really means. Information communication technology, or ICT for short, is the intersection of people and technology. It's essentially trying to encompass how to create, how to share, how to communicate information and technology in the public in order to gain great success, whether that is for the end user or if that is for the company or the organization that you are representing. So essentially, this presentation is going to give you an insight as to what ICT looks like in the workplace, as well as teach you a little bit about user experience. Now, what I really want to do, and what I've been so excited, is to thank everyone that has supported this event. First, I want to thank our director of our school, Dr. Jeff Huber, who is seated in the back, as well as our assistant director, Mr. Will Bunton. They were the ones that agreed to go ahead with this event. They had some faith in this, and I appreciate that. I also want to thank our ICT faculty, our staff, our students, as well as our Lexington community supporters, such as Lex UX, that have promoted the event not only on campus, but also within the Lexington community. And last but definitely not least, I want to thank our marketing specialist, Carly Collins, who without her, I don't know how I would have been able to get a lot of the technology set up in this room, as well as promoting the event on campus, as well as in the community. So thank you all, and thank you guys for coming in. Now I'm going to turn it over to Carly, and she is going to introduce you all our speaker. Enjoy.
So I'm so thrilled to be joined by an awesome guest today, a native Lexingtonian and a fellow Lexington Catholic alum as well, Austin Knight. Austin is a senior UX designer, speaker, and author at HubSpot, focusing on web, mobile, software as a service, and virtual and augmented reality. As a digital nomad, he works remotely and lives amongst different communities throughout the world. He mentors students and startup founders at Columbia University in New York, co-hosts the UX and Growth podcast in Boston, leads a study on South American design in Rio de Janeiro, and speaks at select international events each year. HubSpot is a global software as a service company responsible for building the world's leading inbound marketing and sales software, which is used by over 15,000 companies in more than 90 countries across the globe. We've got a lot to talk about in a short amount of time, and what Austin has to say today is really valuable information. So I recommend you don't listen to just what he's saying, but you get yourself a pen and paper that we've provided for you, and you take notes. It will really be worth it. With that being said, let's give Austin a round of applause.
Thank you. So I'm going to use the mic. Can you guys hear this? Yeah, right away. Okay, so cool. So we got a little bit of an intro there, but I just want to kind of poll the room to figure out who I'm talking to. How many of you all, just by show of hands, were familiar with HubSpot before you came to this talk? Okay, pretty good amount of people. So those of you that aren't familiar with us, Harley gave a pretty good introduction there, but on like the most simple level, what we are is a software as a service company based out of Boston, Massachusetts. And we produce all-in-one marketing and sales software that businesses use to grow. So they can run all of their marketing in one place, all of their sales in one place. And it's actually free to get started. So you can think of like common premium companies like Dropbox, for example. Our company operates in the same way, where all of our software is free to get going. They can start with our free CRM. It's a pretty big software that we're dealing with. So we mentioned 15,000 customers. That number has since been updated to 35,000 across 90 countries around the globe. We're a multi-product company. And as a senior UX designer at HubSpot, I do a few different things. But the primary thing that I do is oversee the user experience for HubSpot.com and all of our primary web properties. These are some pretty high-impact sites. They receive upwards of 10 million hits per month. If you combine them all together, it's around 50 million users that we're dealing with per month. So we have a lot of intricate processes and ways of designing that we've built around that, and that's what I'm going to talk about here today. We get it? Okay. Let me strap this thing on. So show of hands, how many of you all know what user experience is? Like you're familiar with it? Okay, pretty good amount of the crowd. Are any of you all designers? Like actual designers in the room, maybe people that are studying design? Okay, cool. What about developers? Nice. So this is going to be super relevant for you all. Any startup entrepreneurs, that type of thing? People, okay, there we go. Marketers? Okay, nice. These are usually the type of people that I like to talk to, but it's a good. All right, so leading UX in the enterprise, that's what I'm going to be discussing here. This is a little bit of a weird title, though, in a lot of circles. Whenever I give this talk, people look at it and they're like, I don't know about this. Primarily because these two things, lean and enterprise, commonly don't see them together in a sentence. You definitely wouldn't see them together in a talk title. Lean is, you could argue that they're like entire worlds and galaxies apart, and there's a lot of philosophical differences that they have. Lean is going to be a really fast-moving, iterative approach, something that you would associate with agile or startups, or somebody that says hustle a lot. Enterprises are usually slow-moving, bureaucratic. The people that work at them like to stick their heads in the sand rather than face failure and learning. And so a lot of the time we say, these two things can't really work together. But at HubSpot, we've been working really hard to bring them closer together. We've actually found a few good methods for getting this stuff out of the way and creating what we like to call a lean enterprise. And by every stretch of the imagination, we are an enterprise. We have over 1,600 employees across 7 global offices and growing that we have to deal with. We're a public company, so there's a lot of legal things that go into that. Bureaucracy does exist, but we found ways to operate like we're a startup at the same time. And so that's what I want to discuss here today. How did we do that? I'm going to break that out into 2 core sections. The first of which is going to discuss our unique approach to lean UX. So sort of like the philosophical, abstract level of what is our process and how do we do this. And then the second section is going to walk you through a case study of an actual project where we applied this approach. This is kind of the unique part. A lot of the time in Silicon Valley, when you get talks like this, people will just discuss on a theoretical level how they do things like this. But I want to show you all not just how we do it, but how it applies in an actual project. And hopefully you can take some of this and bring it back to your schooling or bring it back to your workplace. So we'll start with a look at our approach to lean UX. When I joined HubSpot, this is what we looked like. Everything was silent. So research was sort of off in its own team. All of the researchers would go off and perform research on their own, and then design existed in its own team, and primarily what they were actually focused on was just aesthetics and the visuals of what the design looked like. And then engineering was also its own team. They operated in their own silo. Naturally, because of these divides between the team, we see a sort of waterfall method. So if you're familiar with waterfall as a development process, that was something that was naturally happening here, naturally happening in a lot of organizations. And what that is to say is that the researchers would go out there and they'd pull some data, they'd get a bunch of qualitative feedback from users, and they'd say, okay, this is what we learned based off of that, this is what we need to do. They'd sort of hand that off to the designers. So their work was done, and then they give that information to the designers, and they'd say, all right, let's put some styling on this shit. And then they'd say, okay, we're done with that. We know what this thing's going to look like. Let's hand this off to the developers. And then the developers are sitting there like, all right, now we got to build this thing, and we have no input on it. And this was really awkward because across the entire rest of the company, they were using an agile Scrum approach, which means that everybody was collaborating and working together. So we were like this one team in our huge company that was operating in this way. So I was tasked with going in there and figuring out how do we change this? How do we rethink our approach to design? Started by adding a user experience layer on top of it. And in the beginning, I was basically that layer. I was hired as our first user experience designer around 3 years ago. And the first thing that I tried to do was just bring these teams closer together. And it actually turned out to be a very natural transition, taking them from 3 separate teams into one team. Because if you really think about it, these are actually the 3 core competencies that you would look for in a user experience designer or a user experience organization. The core competency that you look for in a user experience designer is actually research competency. And then you're also going to look for design ability and development ability. And that's something that we were able to pull from all 3 of these teams and put into one team together. When this happened, we noticed that a few things changed in the dynamics for how they were creating things and working together. First of which, they started collaborating with each other. And second, their timelines started overlapping rather than existing at different times linearly. So research started collecting data, and as they were collecting data, design started creating some rough wireframes or sketches. And then as they were doing that, they were going back to research and saying, oh, we have this idea, what does this implicate? And then as soon as design started to get something that was close to the structure they think they would start to take, the developers began creating a rough code base for that. And so there was a lot more collaboration, and we naturally landed on somewhat of a lean process. After a couple months of doing this, we were like, okay, this is starting to look like lean. So maybe what we should do now is put some pen to paper, formalize this a little bit, and say, this is actually what our process is. So I began by interviewing some of the pre-existing designers and developers that were at the company to understand a little bit more about what was working with this for them, what wasn't working, and together we formulated a process that looks like this. It's pretty simple and straightforward, but there's a few important things to note about this. The first of which is that it's cyclical. So it doesn't happen linearly like the other waterfall process that I was describing. This happens over and over and over again. And because of that, it doesn't necessarily have a beginning or an end. You can kind of jump in at any point of this process and it's going to be fairly effective. The second thing is that it's fluid. So it's going to adapt to the unique needs of the company, of the team, or of the project at hand. That's my favorite thing about this process, is that it recognizes that there is no one perfect process that you apply to every design or dev scenario. I think that's an easy thing to get caught up in. Like you read a book that tells you what the design process should be, and you want to perfectly apply that to your company, and that never works. That always fails. And this process recognizes that that's not something that's actually possible, so it needs to adapt to the unique demands and needs of the situation that it's applied to. If you compare this to some of the other processes that I mentioned, you can start to see how they differ from each other. So first, a waterfall process is going to look something like this. Basically, we're going to build for a really long time. And then that could be anywhere from like 3 to 6 months to a year, depending on what you're building. And then at the end of it, you're going to release it, and only then are you going to get feedback if you push this live to real people. However, there is no scope built into the project to take that feedback and do something with it. It's just live. This is usually the process that you see people take when they think that they themselves and their team need to create a perfect product. They say, okay, it needs to be perfect before it's released to the public. And so they naturally take a little bit of a waterfall approach and keep it hidden until they're finally ready to release it. And only then do they get feedback, but they haven't budgeted to use any of that feedback. Agile attempted to fix some of those problems and shorten the build cycle. So what they said is, okay, we need to work in quick iterations. However, we're only going to release internally. So they're not releasing anything to the public until they feel they have a stable build. They're just building over and over and over again, usually in 2 to 4 week sprints. Until that's where you get like an alpha and a beta from. That terminology comes from this process. Until they finally have a stable release that they can put out there to the public, and then they're going to get feedback. Depending on the team and how they implement this process, they may or may not end up using that feedback in the future. Lean continues to shorten the build cycle, but it says as soon as we have something viable enough to be released, we're going to put it out there to the public. We're not going to be afraid. We're not going to try to create something perfect. We recognize that the only way for us to create something perfect is to get real feedback and data from our users and our customers. So this first cycle right here, that's something that's commonly referred to as an MVP, a minimum viable product. Have any of you all heard of that term before? Okay, cool. So what this essentially says is that for the first iteration in a lean cycle, you are going to build the minimum amount of product that you need to in order to get real live data based off of that product. And the way that you determine that is on the viability of the design that you created. So whenever that design is viable and functional enough to get some reliable data and feedback, you're going to put it live, and that's your MVP. And then every single iteration after that is building off of that first iteration. But the important thing there is that they're always using the feedback from the previous iteration. So I'm going to create a product, put it out there, let people tell me what they think about it, and then use their feedback to drive my decisions in the next iteration. This is really powerful. It's the first process that really pushes people to do that, rather than just sit inside our boardrooms and conferencings and say, okay, this is what I think as an expert in design or as an expert in dev. We're recognizing that the genius doesn't necessarily come from the designer or the developer, but rather it comes from how they can interpret their audience and design for them, because they're designing for a customer, not for themselves. So that's the powerful part of this process. When we take that and we put it onto a timeline, we can start to see how those lean UX cycles operate along the timeline. Think, check, over and over and over again until eventually you have something that's fully stable and you're happy with. Looking at the deliverables that this process can create, depending on the phase that you're dealing with, it can change a lot. There's a lot of stuff that this can produce, and it can get really overwhelming if you look at this all together. However, there's also a few important things to know about this. First off, we almost never, I've never been on a project where we did all of these things. That would be ridiculous. Second, again, it comes back to the flexible and fluid nature of the process, and that it recognizes we're going to give all of these tools to the designer, and then the designer is going to determine what is going to happen in each project. So in some projects, we may say, okay, we need to create some sketches and paper prototypes so that we can really get a rough idea of this before we start creating any pixels. And other projects will say, you know what, we're going to blow right past that stuff and go right into design and move quickly. And that's what's great about the flexibility of this process. I think that one of the coolest things as well is that it really places a lot of power and responsibility into the hands of the designers. So a lot of people look at this process and at first they're like, wow, this is like so worked out. It almost seems automated. What is the role of the designer here? When actually put into practice, the influence of the designer becomes greater than ever. And that's a really cool thing to watch. So if we look at what some of the actual deliverables may look like from each phase, in the think phase, we may create some scenarios or some post-its and stuff like that to understand what it's going to be like for the user to walk through and experience. In the make phase, we're creating some rough structures and wireframes. And then finally, in the check phase, we go back and we're going to look at how the design is performing. So we could run some heat maps to see what people are engaging with, what they're clicking on. Scroll maps to look at the scroll depth, like how far are people going down the page or into the software, so we can understand how it's performing against that. In the same way that I believe in simple and straightforward processes, I also believe in simple and straightforward tools. So for all of our research and content, any data related to the project, we're using some form of a Google tool, mostly Google Drive. So all of the qualitative and quantitative data that we compile is going to live in the Drive within a sheet or a doc or a folder. We know that at any point, if we want to get some of the data that is driving the project, whether it be quantitative or qualitative, is going to be in the Google Drive related to that project. Then designs and assets are contained within Envision. So all of our stakeholders can go in there and comments on the actual design, which is nice because you get feedback in context of the work that you're dealing with, rather than just sort of like arbitrary back and forth messages. That can cause a lot of communication issues. We'll hand off assets to developers within InVision, but something that's cool about this as well is that we've created a design system. So a lot of our designs are actually, like, even though the designer is working in Sketch or Photoshop, depending on what they're creating, they're actually basing their design off of pre-coded modules that we've created. So there's pre-existing code snippets to go with every asset. So we've kind of gotten to a point where developers don't actually need us to export assets anymore, which is a powerful place to be at. For ongoing communication, we use Slack. That's a really popular one now. You need to just sort of ad hoc, one-off, send something to a developer or whatever. That's the place where we do that. This has been really important for us, like this level of documentation, because our team is so distributed around the world. Making sure that everybody is in sync and communicating well is super important, especially if you think about how this process functions. You've got a lot of overlapping layers, people doing different things all at once, and keeping that together and having everybody know what's happening across the entire project. It's quite a balancing act. So Slack helps with that, and then if we need to take it up another level, we use Zoom and Loom for video conferencing. I'm told that this talk is being streamed on Zoom right now. That's like a really popular video conferencing platform. So if you want to have like a quick meeting, 30-minute meeting, something like that, we'll usually set up a Zoom for that. Loom, weirdly enough, it's like the same product and they have a rhyming name. But the difference with Loom is that it's more focused on short videos, so like short messages that you can send out. So if, for those of us that have used Slack before, you sometimes find yourself typing like 3 paragraphs in Slack, and that's not how the tool was meant to be used. A lot of the time, this is when we'll pull up a Loom and just shoot a quick 3 to 5 minute video so we can send out to people and express our idea or whatever it is that we need to communicate that way. We've kind of found like really good ways to say, okay, this sort of like long form collaborative content is going to belong in email. More sort of like immediate communication, but maybe it's a little bit long or detailed, that's going to go in a Loom video. And then quick one-off, like very easy to understand and explain communication happens through Slack. And the most immediate is going to be through Slack. That's like what you got to reply to quickly and always be on top of that stuff. Then whenever we get results, we're reporting that in Atlas and Confluence. So that's like a Wikipedia, but internal to HubSpot. It's an intranet. So every project that we run, every large piece of data that we collect, every effort that we put forth, we're documenting in our intranet. So there's sort of a bunch of reports and things like that that people can access through our wiki. This is important for 2 reasons. First, accountability and communication across the organization. When you're dealing with so many people and so many different moving parts, it's important to make sure that people know what your team is producing and what you've learned, and that you're also held accountable for letting people know that. And then second, for employee onboarding, this becomes really important. If you're growing your team, instead of having to sit down with each new hire and tell them the entire history of the company, you can refer them to a few links internally, and they'll be able to brush up themselves. So when I joined the company 3 years ago, we were 400 people. Now we're 1,600. So we're hiring ridiculous amounts of people every month, and this helps us to be much more efficient in doing that. And then we have standards, stand-ups, and reviews. This is like an agile practice. Basically, in like high crunch situations, every morning we're all getting together for 15, 20 minutes stand-up, and more like relaxed times we're looking at once a week. To make sure that everybody is in sync on what they're working on, what their deliverables are, progress, and everything like that. And then take all of this stuff, and it's all going to be documented in Jira, another Atlassian product. So this becomes the single source of truth. If there's an important piece of research that comes in, yes, that's put in the Google Drive, but then it's logged in the Jira. If there is a new design iteration that comes in, it's put in InVision, but it's logged in the Jira. If there's an important conversation on Slack, it's screenshotted and logged in the Jira. So everybody knows if I need to see like a 1,000-foot view of everything that's happening in this project, I can go to Jira. That's nice for us because we're able to create tasks and Kanban boards. Our project managers do that for each project. And then if you're like at a VP level, you can go in there and see what each one of your teams is working on, what the conversations are, what their progress is, and you can really get a good sense of what's happening across the entire company in the matter of a few clicks on here. So that's everything is put in its respective place, but then it's ultimately going to go into the Atlas security product. What this ultimately enables us to do is rapidly and regularly release thoughtful solutions that are supported by real user and business data. So we're doing this fast, we're doing this a lot, and we're using real quantitative and qualitative data to drive our decisions, not our own opinions or subjective drives for what we think looks best or should be a certain way. Okay, so now that we know what the process is and how that works on like a philosophical level, how does this work when applied to a real project? So that's what I want to walk you all through now. I'm going to talk you through a HubSpot.com redesign that we recently did. And actually, even though I'm calling it a redesign here, it's really more of a major iteration. So redesign would imply that we're going to be throwing out a lot of the stuff that we had from our previous design, whether it be like the styles and visual execution, or even some of the learnings that we had, and we're going to be starting anew. You can tell that process that I just laid out here doesn't really lend itself to that. It's completely iterative and cyclical, so it's always going to be carrying the stuff from the previous iterations through into the next one. So it's really more of a major iteration, or we sort of came to refer to it as a refactoring. And I'll explain that a little bit more later. So if you imagine that a timeline of a year, and you plot each quarter throughout that year, to just explain how this iteration works in a little bit more depth. In the first couple of quarters, we're going to be doing quick little iterations, right? Releasing product updates. Maybe we require a new small product that we're going to be talking about. But then ultimately, in one quarter, we're going to go through a major iteration where we bring all of those previous iterations together into one. Because as you're doing like little releases throughout the site, a lot of disparate things can happen. So you ultimately want to bring all of your learnings together and turn that over in a single iteration. And then we'll continue on with smaller iterations after that. So in this case, we were working with a site that looked like this. This was HubSpot.com at the time. As I sort of alluded to a little bit earlier, it's a pretty big beast. So we're dealing with over 10 million visitors per month just on the core domain. And that turns into over 60,000 leads that we're generating per month, which then turns into over $270 million in revenue per year from the site. And that is generated by over 30,000 customers. So this site isn't just serving users that are interested in our software, or that want to learn about software as a service or inbound marketing or sales or anything like that. It's also serving people that have already purchased our product and are going there to use it or to learn more about how they can use it. They're spread out over 90 countries around the world. So we're dealing with a lot of different cultures and languages, and that dramatically impacts the way that we design for this property. And that all amounts to over 2,000 pages that are logged in Google. So the site is huge in terms of how much data, raw data we're dealing with, both analytically and in terms of the raw pages that are on the site. So this can get overwhelming when you look at a site that is this size and scale. You say, okay, we need to make a major iteration on this thing. We need to do something global across the entire site. And inevitably, the conversation turns into how are we going to do that? Because it's just too big. Where do we even start? How are we going to have a team that's large enough to focus on across the entire site? And so the key to handling something like that is developing really clear and straightforward goals. So that you know you're only going to focus on the opportunities and the areas of the site that are important and that you think you can make the greatest change across. And then ultimately after that, you're going to be pushing large global CSS updates throughout the rest of the site that's going to bring it up to par with whatever changes you make. But you want to identify where are the opportunities, where are the areas that we should be focusing on the most, and let's set goals against those. So we developed 4 core goals. The first of which was elevating the user experience of the site. So That's talking about the underpinnings of this design, the stuff that makes it tick, the structure, the usability, the information architecture, all of that stuff. Earlier, I mentioned that we began to call this a refactoring. So I want to explain that a little bit more because that really plays into the user experience part of it. Whenever you create a new design, say that I designed this homepage 100% from scratch, I created every single one of those elements within the context of the other elements in that design. So I knew, okay, the hero section is going to say this, and it's going to have this visual, and then we're going to have a video down here and a social feed over here. All of this stuff was created at the same time, and it sort of had this each element had awareness of the other elements in the design. So it's like one big consistent thing that you can push out at once. And it all looks like it was intentional, and like every single element was supposed to be there. It's nice, it's clean, it's consistent. However, inevitably, you're going to want to improve the performance of your design over time in those small iterations that I was talking about. So you're going to run some experiments, and maybe you're going to change up the hero section. That's going to win. This one's better than the previous one, so you leave it that way. Then you're going to run another experiment down below that, and well, that one lost because that happens from time to time, and so you're going to get rid of that one. But then you try another one, a different version of that, and this time it wins. And you keep doing this over and over and over again until eventually you have a site that is full of a bunch of disparate winners, a bunch of experiments that perform very well quantitatively, but were not created together. And this causes a huge dilemma for designers, because usually what they feel is an experience that quantitatively is doing really, really great. Like you could be the best in your industry. Your conversion rate is 10 times better than it was last year. But as a designer, if you go through the site, you'll be sort of navigating around and trying things, and you're like, you know what? This is a bit shit. And so it's tough because it's like, I don't like the way that this thing looks. I don't think that it flows nice. I don't think it's consistent. But I can't deny the fact that the data says that it's performing extremely well. And what's happening here is a phenomenon that I like to refer to as design debt. So how many of us have heard of the concept of technical debt before? Just a few people? Okay. This is a good little thing to read up on. I actually explain it a little bit in this essay as well, if you want to learn about it in the context of design debt. But what this says is that as you iterate on a tech stack, or in this case, as you iterate on the design, you're going to be moving quickly, you're going to be making compromises, trying different things. Ultimately, that design is going to deteriorate throughout the process. You're going to lose some of that consistency, and you're going to end up getting something that looks like a bunch of different elements that were put together, even though they're performing well, they don't look and feel that great. So you want to go through a major iteration like the one that I'm proposing here, where you bring all of those elements back together within the context of each other, and they start to feel more consistent and like they belong together. So next, we wanted to look at our creative direction. This is what a homepage looked like at the time, and most of the site looked like this, but we didn't have a fully universal creative direction. So every now and then you get a page that looks like this, which is just as different from the other design as you could possibly get. And this is on the same domain. This was on HubSpot.com. So you would have users that would go to the homepage and then eventually make their way to this one and thought that they were on a different website, even though they were actually on the same site. That's a problem. So we needed to figure out objectively what was the best creative direction and then head that way. We also wanted to take a look at conversion. We knew that there were opportunities to get more people signed up for our product, to get more people paying for our product. So that was a big piece of this. And then finally, we were launching actual software products. So those were not accommodated on the site at the time, and we needed to bring those into the site. And this meant actual structural changes to the way that the site had been architected. So that was the next thing that we needed to do. And the tough thing about that is that it had a hard release date. So we launched all of our major software releases at an event called Inbounds that we hold in Boston every year. It just happened a couple months ago. 22,000 attendees came out to Boston to learn about our software, learn about inbound marketing, and all of the stuff that we're doing. And with that, we launched a bunch of new software. So what this meant for us when we were starting this project was that we had a hard launch date that we had to meet. It actually amounted to about 3 months from start to finish. I'm talking from like the very initial conversation that I had over a beer with my VP, like, you know what, we should redesign this whole thing. So like actually pushing the code live at the conference. So what this meant is that a lot of stuff was happening at the same time. Like that pattern that I was talking about, where there were overlapping people working together, that got way more intense with this project because the timeline was so tight. And actually, if you think about like the purest way to approach lean UX, you won't even have a timeline. It doesn't really lend itself to that because it's not finite in that sense. So when you do put a timeline on it, things can start to get a little intense, and if you shrink that timeline, the intensity just goes up. So that's what we were seeing here. With that, we knew that we had to have actual hard metrics that we would measure the success of these cold events. So we boiled those down to design and conversion. We were looking at the performance of our usability and user acceptance testing for design, and then conversion rates and revenue and retention for conversion. And these weren't just sort of like fluffy metrics that we were throwing out, like we should make the design a little bit better. We had hard ways to measure our design and the success of it, all the way from aesthetics through usability, using tools like the SUS system usability scale, usability cloud validate. We were able to quantify the execution of our design, and then we ended up tracking over 90 different conversion flows throughout our site. So different ways that people could sign up for our product and pay for it. There were over 90 different ways that they could do that we were tracking. And running it through a few different estimation models, we figured out for each one of those flows what our potential conversion rate could be as a result of this project. So that set our goals for that. But that wasn't enough to necessarily get us started with the project. We could have theoretically done like a much more pulled back version of this and just updated the architecture of the site for the product releases that we had and call it a day. So we needed to prove out that it was smart for us to go through this level of an iteration and an effort and invest the company time and resources into something like this. So we started with an MVP test, minimum viable product, that quick little thing that I was talking about as the first iteration in a lean UX process. And this is a design that I came up with. I got together with one other person in the company, Matt Harvey. He's like really focused on growth and development. I'm really focused on design. And we just said, okay, let's like launch a test and see what we can get out of it. So we created something that looks like this. In order to do that, the first thing that we did was we took our style guide. If you're not familiar with the style guide, this is where like designers say, this is the font that you use. These are the colors that you use. This is how far elements should be spaced out from each other. We took that, and that had been produced over the course of several years. It's a huge document. We're really proud of it. And we said, yeah, let's light that and not do any of that. And we said, we're going to do whatever we want with this test. So we began with guerrilla research, pulling in data that through methods that we had never used before, breaking some of the rules, getting types of data that we had never even looked at before, like things specifically focused on cognitive load that required ridiculous ways to test the design. And that changed a lot of our perceptions about how the design was actually performing. And then that led us to change our messaging and our tone of voice. All of a sudden, the brand started talking in a completely different way than it ever had before, just for this isolated little test. And then we introduced illustrations and drop shadows that I've since realized were hideous, but I liked them at the time. I was like, let's put some serious depth on this thing. And then we changed our colors. We added some CSS animations that we had never really used before to help tell the story of the product. Changed our conversion approach, so the way that we were getting people to convert and then the process that they were going through was fundamentally different. And then we took all this and we launched it without telling anybody. So we put it live on Monday, and then we were able to call it like 2 or 3 days later. And instead of telling people that we were going to be doing this, we just came to them with the data and said, okay, this is something that we did. And we ended up increasing our conversion rate by 20%. So you can't be mad at us at this point. Our MVP that we ran did prove out the necessity for a total major iteration on HubSpot.com and the need to sort of rethink some of our approaches. And we found that users liked it as well. We tested it qualitatively. It passed a lot of those tests that I mentioned earlier. So we felt like we were on a good general path. This was something that we should invest in. So basically what I'm saying is if you want to be successful at UX, burn your style guide, do whatever you want. Don't tell your team about it. Maybe it's going to work, maybe it won't, but you can still brag about it at a speech like, I'm kidding. Actually, a lot of the stuff that we tried failed. Like there were things, parts of this design that we were really glad in the end that we didn't launch this across the entire site. It would have been disastrous. So it turns out that there is a reason why two rogue individuals generally aren't going to determine the design direction for an entire company. However, we did manage to learn a lot from this, and that's what's important. That we got some real learnings from an isolated experiment that we were able to use to justify a project that would impact the entire site. And the truth is, we actually knew that it was going to perform pretty well. We did our homework before we pushed any code. We ran some pre-launch heat maps using PNG, and then there you can see the reference of a post-launch heat map. So this was telling us quantitatively how the design was going to perform before we ever touched any code or put anything live on the site. We knew what users were going to interact with, what the conversion rate was going to be, just off of the quick PNG design that I created in Sketch. So that allowed me to go from creating a design in the morning, getting something really rough, and then testing it and having my data back by the end of the afternoon to know, okay, it's actually going to perform really well. Let's code this piece up and get it live. And we did that qualitatively as well. So we ran some user tests, talked to some people at Starbucks, that was our faithful little joint over there, and we did know that we were on the right track with some of that stuff as well. So once we had done this, we proven out our conversion rate. We knew that there was an opportunity there. We got to the point where we were ready to form a team and actually kick this thing off. So we started with a SWAT team. I like to refer to it as a SWAT team because that's a cool name, but it's also kind of how we function. We were like mercenaries going in and changing this site and improving it. That was a really important thing for us to do because in a company of over 1,600 people, with a website that is like literally the lifeblood of the business, and then like that revenue metric that I was showing you, it's almost all influenced by the site. Whenever you say, hey, we want to make a change to the website, all of a sudden, literally every single person in the organization wants to play a role in that. From the executives all the way down to like customer support, everybody has a stake in this property. So we needed to work with a small team or else we would never really accomplish anything. We started with 3 executive stakeholders, 3 total people that would make all of the final calls and approvals for the design. So our VP of brand was going to be looking at aesthetics and stuff like that. The CMO would preside over the marketing and messaging. And the VP of growth was going to be looking at some of those conversion related metrics that I was talking about, figuring out how we were going to achieve that and whether or not he felt that the designs were going to meet those standards. Then we assigned a DRI for each critical part of the design. So a DRI stands for directly responsible individual. What this means is that if you are the DRI for user experience, then you are ultimately responsible for user experience, but you also make the calls on user experience. So it's sort of like this sort of double-edged sword in a little bit of a way where you have autonomy over that part of the product, but you're also ultimately responsible for it. This is important for us because if you're moving with so quickly with such a tight timeline, you need to know who you can go to immediately get the answer on each respective piece of the project. So that yellow person there, that's me, one UX designer on the entire project, one visual designer, a couple copywriters, a couple developers, and analytics or data analysts, growth, SEO, conversion rate optimization, project manager, fairly straightforward. And importantly, all of these people were based, that led to 12 individual contributors, and all of them were based around the globe. So we had a bunch of people in our Boston office, but then people working remote from California, a bunch of people in our Dublin office over in Ireland, we had copywriters in Canada and New Zealand. I'm based out of Brazil, so I was working remote from Brazil, and the main person that I was corresponding with was in Dublin, so he's 5 hours ahead of me. So the ways that we corresponded and collaborated really relied on this DRI model. So I knew, okay, no matter where they are in the world, there's this one person that we need to go to for this area of the time. That may seem like a lot of people, especially when I talk to startups, they say, wow, like, I wish that I could have a small team of 12 people to redesign my site. And I totally get that. That's a lot of people to work on site. However, if you consider the scope of our organization when you're dealing with 1,600 people, 12 people that are essentially deciding the fate of the lifeblood of the business, that's less than 1% of the people in the company. That's a small, lean team. So, and there are also some competencies in there that are total luxuries for us that we definitely wanted to have represented that you wouldn't necessarily even have access to in a startup, like a data analyst or a specific CRO person or something like that. This is something of note. In big companies, keeping your team small and lean is really important for blocking stakeholder flow and slow bureaucratic processes. And I would actually say this is the case in any company. So if you're in a startup, one annoying, over-opinionated CEO can account for 100 people in the team. They can slow you down in the same way that having 100 stakeholders would. So you want to make sure that your team is not just lean in terms of warm bodies, but also lean in terms of philosophy and understanding what your role is and how quickly you need to move. Then we moved into the think phase, and we started with research that began with our conversion flows. This is what our conversion flows looked like when we started. So you can see some of them are really straightforward, like the first visit, and then you got basically 2-3 steps before you're in the product. Others, like this one up over here, are really complicated. Like we had 7 to 8 steps that people had to go through before they could get into the product. When we analyzed these, we found that simple flows converted at a rate of 2 to 3 times higher than the more complex counterparts. So we knew, okay, we need to simplify this stuff. That's exactly what we did. We created a get started flow that standardized our conversion process across the entire website. No matter where you are in HubSpot.com, you can get into our product in 3 ways. You can find that today at HubSpot.com/product/get-started if you want to play that in that. Then we looked at user journeys. This is my favorite thing about the HubSpot Analytics platform. Something I haven't mentioned yet is that our site is actually built on our software. We're a dog fooding company. So we build our product and we use our product. And one of the nice things about that software is that it has very, very deep personal analytics. So you can go in there and you can look at a user on the website and their individual interactions. So we were able to go in and look at Raymond here. He ended up signing up for multiple different products. And he went through all of these different interactions, but he never logged into one of those products. And then Hassan, he kept signing up for the same product over and over and over again, but he never logged in. And so after going through a few dozen of these sort of on-the-ground individual user journeys, we were able to find that people were having a hard time distinguishing between our conversion forms and our sign-in forms. So quick little bits of knowledge like that helped us to rethink how we would be approaching our conversion design versus how we would be approaching our app design. This then led into collecting some qualitative feedback. So we have NPS surveys and scores that we send out. Our company sends a lot of emails, so people just reply to them and tell us what they think of us. And a lot of the time it's good, but every now and then, you get somebody that's gonna slap you across the face like this person. And then we ran user testing and one-on-one qualitative studies, got a lot of good feedback there, and then we took the most interesting user groups. So take somebody that logged in and then did a bunch of stuff. They like engaged with the product a ton, and then they left and never came back. What happened there? We wanted to figure out what was happening to that user versus the user that logged in and did nothing and then didn't come back for 2 weeks and then randomly started paying for our product. These outlier users helped us to understand some of the interesting interactions that people were having with the site and the product and incorporate that into the designs going forward. You can see some of the data that we collected from that there. What this allowed us to do was narrow down that number of pages that we would be focusing on to 39. So we identified 39 core pages that we felt would be the most impactful across the site. So first, we've got that big number of 2,000 that I was talking about. That's like the total pages on the site. And then when we started this project, I kind of looked at it and I was like, you know, I think about 70 pages is going to be the number. That's what I would throw into this. And then we narrowed that down and we were able to identify actually these exact 39 pages that we should be focusing on to hit our goals. And then everything else is going to be updated with global CSS changes. So then we started moving into content and copy. And the first thing that the copywriters did was do more research. So this is a little bit unintuitive when you're dealing with copywriters, especially if they're new to the industry or if you've got people that haven't worked with copywriters before. The easiest thing to pay attention to is the words. Wordsmithing, right? What are the actual words that they're creating? Does it speak to me? And you tend to think that that's the majority of the work that copywriters do is write. But what we found is that the highest quality, the best copywriters to work with are also excellent researchers. And they're going to be incorporating high quality research into their copy. So the copywriters that we were working with, we could point to a sentence and say, you know, where is the rationale behind this? And they wouldn't say, oh, you know, I thought that this was the best way to structure this message. They would point us to a piece of hard data. So they were doing actual research to figure out what the best messaging was for every single word that they were creating. It was painstaking, it was an intense process, but it was amazing how confident everybody became in the messaging that we had, and how much that impacted the way that we then approached the design. Because the first thing that they did was start taking that copy and putting it into like these sort of rough structures in Google Docs. So copywriters also think in terms of design. They're storytellers. They want to create a way to tell that story. And so they begin usually with a rough sense of the design. And then I created a bunch of modules for them. Said, hey, I think these are the types of elements that we're going to be using. And set that their way. And then they just threw the copy into it, moved them around, and said, this is generally how I would tell the story. They threw these ugly yellow post-it notes on there to clarify things for me. What I'm describing here is copy first design. So what this is to say is that the content determines the design, not the other way around. So instead of creating a design and then trying to jam the copy and the content into it, we say we're going to create the copy and content and let the story be the center of whatever it is that we're building, and then have the design be formed around that and aid in telling the story that we're trying to bring across. This is important to us because in previous copy versus copy tests alone, we found our conversion rate increased in the neighborhood of 20%. So what that is to say that we had variation A with whatever it was, and then in variation B, all that we did was just change words. We didn't change anything about the design, nothing about our traffic mix or the marketing that's bringing people there. We literally just changed words, and we saw a conversion rate increase of 20%. This happens over and over and over again. So this gives you a little bit of a sense for how impactful copy and words can be in the first place. Once we were starting to get like a rough copy structure, like if you think of those early copy docs that I was talking about, as soon as we got there, I really started evaluating design and figuring out how we were going to put those elements together so I could get to those rough wireframes with the modules that I built for the copywriters. This is a tough thing to do. Because the truth is that aesthetics can be really difficult to get right, and they can be even more difficult to measure. A lot of the time, we want to focus on what we personally think looks best. We say, oh, you know, the aesthetics of the design is all about what the designer thinks is the best, or looks best, whatever is nicest. And that can turn into a lot of really like rage-inducing debates, where it's just one person's opinion versus another person's opinion. However, if we reposition the way that we're thinking about aesthetics, we can start to look at them fairly objectively. And that is to say that the best aesthetics account for what the users consider to be beautiful more than what the stakeholders consider to be beautiful. So as a designer, if you're creating something for an audience, you don't want to create something that you think looks nice, but the audience may hate. Rather, you want to create something that the audience thinks looks nice and they want to. And that is something that we can measure. So there's the good news. We can always poll our audience and figure out what aesthetic approach they prefer over another. So we did that. We began with, I'm just going to give you a couple examples of how we did this. One of them, we evaluated illustrations. So At the time, I think this is still the case a little bit if you go on Dribble, which is of course just the ultimate authority on design. That a lot of people were playing around with illustrations. That was like the really popular thing. Intercom was doing it. Slack was starting to play around with it. So we wanted to do a similar thing because we thought it was like a cool way to tell a story. So we came up with 10 different illustrative directions, and they were fairly different from each other. And then I also just pulled illustrations from around the web. So I like took Intercom's illustrations and everything, and we tested them. We put them in front of users and wanted to figure out which illustrations they preferred, which ones spoke to them the most, which would cause the highest conversion rates when we put them into the context of design. And what we found was that it actually wasn't a matter of what illustrative direction we should take, but rather it was a matter of whether or not we should do illustrations in the first place. Nobody could agree on an illustrative direction, and we ended up finding out as we continued to test it that actually the majority of users felt that illustrations were not a positive design element. This was like a huge humbling moment for me because I had always looked up. I'm going to give the example of Intercom because they were the first to do it, and they also got shit on the most in this process by the users. So I really looked up to the illustrative approach that they took because how many of you out here are familiar with Intercom? I talked about a black box. Okay, so Intercom is just like a chat software as a service company. If you go to intercom.io, they still have the illustrations up there. You can see them. I think that they're very nice still. But they were like the first to incorporate illustrations into their site design. And it was great because they used illustrations to help tell the story in like a fun and quirky way. And instead of using people, they used animals as the characters in the illustrations, which we love because in our PC society, choosing a gender or a race or anything like that, it can be really bad for you. So by using animals, they didn't have to make a decision there. So we were like really gung-ho on the direction that they were taking with that. And what ended up happening is, when we tested out with users, they were like, wait a second, why is a giraffe serving somebody a scoop of ice cream? Which is something that they actually do in their illustrations. Or I think that these are really silly. This is supposed to be a software company. Why are you using such childish drawings to sell me your software? And so it's this moment where you go from like, okay, there is this world that designers live in, where we love to play around with our different trends and ideas and everything like that. And then there's this other world that everybody else lives in, where they're going to perceive things completely different than we are. So, well, I was in love with the fact that they chose animals because it was like the perfect way to avoid that entire conflict. Nobody else none of the regular users were ever able to make that connection. They just saw a giraffe serving a scoop of ice cream. Did the same thing with drop shadows and a bunch of other aesthetic elements. Found the users didn't like those, big surprise. And then I continued to do this. I created an InVision board, where I just pulled inspiration from all around the web, including like the color palette and some typography. And we tested all of this stuff to figure out what the best aesthetic direction was for us. We kind of went back and forth, and what we found was that universally across the board, clean and conservative designs won. So the designs that were super trendy and design forward, we loved, but they didn't perform on the same level as something that was very easy to parse, straightforward, clean, conservative, familiar would perform. So then, moving into design, began with wireframes. So we skipped right past the sketches and paper prototypes and everything like that I was talking about, partly because our research helped us to understand exactly where we needed to be with design, and we felt we didn't need that stuff. Turned those wireframes into mockups, so we started to set an aesthetic direction. If you had unique functionality or something, an interaction that we needed to communicate, we create a prototype. So here you can see this is like a hero section that would have images depicting a persona that would then turn into a rotating video of like what that persona was doing throughout their workday. This amounted to over 100 wireframes, 60 mockups, and 4 full prototypes. So all 39 pages built into a functional prototype that we could test. It functioned in the same way that like if you were to go to HubSpot.com as a user, the site would function as a live site. These prototypes were functioning in that way so that we could get some reliable quantitative and qualitative data from them. Built out our CSS and global elements for those pages that we weren't directly designing. And then we tested it. There's a quick map on the left there, and then a Deuteranopia flow line simulation on the right. So a little bit of accessibility, keeping some of our accessibility practices. Looking at video in motion, pre-launch heat map up there is depicting a user clicking on a button to play a video, and post-launch also depicting that same button, just the iteration for the final version of the button. You can see it's the second most clicked element on the page in both of those, second only behind the CTA or the conversion button. And also, the heat maps look very similar to each other, even though one was just an image and the other is a fully functional website. From this, we found that 65% of our users prefer to evaluate software by watching videos, so we invested in video at certain parts of the site. And when we did that, we saw a conversion rate increase of 300%. So when there was the presence of a video describing the product, of course, there was a certain formula to that video that we had to know. But when we had it, people were 3 times more likely to buy our software than when we didn't have it. Developers at the same time were working on 130 different pages that would be published internationally. So these were the core domains that we were serving at the time. You take like those 39 pages and extrapolate them out across other domains, and you're dealing with roughly 130 pages to publish across the entire project. 39 is the core site, so those are some of the designs that we landed on. And then we pushed the button at inbound 2016. So when our VP of product was on stage launching the new products, we were back there actually pushing the button to send those pages live on the site and start accommodating the new product. So that picture down there on the right, that's me sitting behind the stage, half shitting myself, half like super excited that I was in that moment, because of course things were going down all the time, but also we were finally getting through live. That was an important moment for us. So then as soon as we push that live button, 57% reduction in CSS assets. So the site was moving faster, it was leaner, that was good. Then moving into the check phase. So after we launched it, a lot of projects, this is where they would end. They would hit the button and say, cool, our CSS assets are reduced by 67%, that's great. Let's move on to the next project. At that point, we were about 25% done with the work that we would be doing on this major iteration. You can sort of think back to that timeline that I had with the 4 quarters and see how that might work over the course of the next 3 quarters. And so because of that, we immediately removed into the check phase, looking at the results. How is this thing performing? What can we learn from it? What worked? What didn't work? What do we do in the next iteration to take it another step further? First, we looked at conversion on those 90 different tracking or conversion flows that we were tracking. This is a look at a dashboard that was created using hybrid data. So we're collecting data for HubSpot Analytics, Google Analytics 360, and Amplitude Analytics. HubSpot is looking at the individual, so like the actual specific person on the site. Google Analytics is looking at data in aggregate, so like large quantitative values, clicks in aggregate, conversions, and all that stuff. And then Amplitude is looking at that type of data plus the HubSpot type of data that's inside of the software product. So then we're able to see how individuals interact with our design from their very first interaction with us on the site, even after they leave the site, maybe they're on a third party like Facebook or something like that, and then we get back to the site and then when they're in the software product. So that gave us a really, really big view of the impact that this design had on our metrics. This led to a 2 times conversion increase. So we doubled the conversion rate of HubSpot.com as a result of this, and that meant a 35% increase in demos. This is our highest value MQL, marketing qualified lead. So what that means is that if we can get somebody to sign up for a demo, as opposed to some other type of conversion, we're going to be much more likely to turn them into a paying customer. So we want as many of those as we can get. We also saw a 2 times call volume increase, so twice the amount of people were calling us, and 38% more people were chatting with us, with our salespeople. And this ultimately led to a 27% increase in product sign-ups. So people that actually signed up for the product, actually purchased it, became activated and retained users. If you think back to that revenue metric that I gave at the beginning of the presentation, you can kind of like divide these numbers into each other and see that this wasn't just a cool percentage change on the site. This meant actual bottom line retained revenue change for our business. So we really started to see how a little bit of a change in design can actually mean huge amounts of revenue and longevity for a company. But we weren't done here. We continued to iterate additional experiments, different things that we tried out. If you go to the site now, it looks like none of the designs that I showed you. It looks more like this because we kept doing this and learning more and pushing the performance further. So this is a look. This is a look at the HubSpot.com homepage right now. Look at it while you can because in like a week we're pushing another update to it. So you can start to see how this iterative lean UX cycle actually can be applied in a sort of lean enterprise. Even though you have a big company, you can operate on a small lean scale. And I think that that's a very powerful realization to have. If you want to learn more about this, I went on the UIE podcast, User Interface Engineering. They're like, these guys have been around since before the user experience was a word. And I went on there with Jared School, he's the host, and Jeff Gotthelf. Jeff Gotthelf wrote the book, Lean UX. So all of the stuff that I was talking about, he's the guy that actually came up with it and wrote the book on it. If you want to learn more about our approach and how it sort of coincides with the research and writing that he's doing, that's a really good podcast to listen to. You can find that at uxt.co/UIE. And if you want a case study on this, maybe like a quick link to share with some friends, I wrote up a retrospective on the HubSpot blog at uxt.co/study. HubSpot's information is on the left. My information is on the right. If you want to stalk me and learn more about some of the talks and essays that I'm doing around this stuff, if you go to uxt.co/lean, that came up several times throughout the talk, that'll take you to a page that I built specifically for this talk with all of the slides, video of a previous time that I gave this talk that you can share with people if you want, another link to essay and some cool stuff like that. So there's your resources if you want to learn more about this. I also believe we have some time for questions. So cool. So I'm going to stick around. If you all want to ask me questions about this or about UX in general, really, I'm open to all of it, and we can do that. So